Hello, everybody, and welcome to INE Live. My name is Brian McGahan. I'm the Director of Networking Content here at INE. And today we're going to be talking about our new Juniper content that we have available for learning paths in our platform. We're going to talk about the videos that we have available, the quizzes that we have available, and then also talk about the new lab environment that we have for those of you that want to get hands-on experience with the Juniper technologies. And joining me today, I have my instructors, Keith Bogart, Peter Kaluzny, and Rohit. So, Keith, if you want to say hi.
Hey, everybody. Good to see you. Welcome to our
Hello,
show
guys.
today.
Welcome.
Peter.
Hello, guys. Welcome, everyone.
And lastly, we have Rohit Pardasani, who is our expert professional level instructor in our new Juniper technologies, joining us today. So I wanted to talk about what is the new content that we have available today on my.ine.com for Juniper, talk a little bit about the Juniper certifications. I think most everybody here is a little bit more familiar with the Cisco certifications in terms of CCNA, CCNP, CCIE for networking, and we're going to talk a little bit about how those correlate to the Juniper level certifications and what materials that we have available for that. So as usual, we will be fielding your questions live, so please feel free to type in and join the chat if you want to start your question with a Q so our moderator can help to pull those out. We would appreciate it. But otherwise, let's go ahead and get started. Keith, I would like to start with you. And what can you tell us just a little bit about the JNCIA, the JNCIA Junos, and where that falls in terms of the overall certification paths that Juniper has available today?
Sure. Yeah. Great question, Brian. So, a lot of vendors, Cisco, Juniper, follow a similar format when they have more than one certification that they're offering. Is they start with some baseline certification, and then from there they build on that. So for those of you who are familiar with Cisco, they've got the CCNA, which has topics across, wireless, wired networking, security. And then once you get your CCNA, then you can branch off to like higher level certifications. Well, Juniper is no different. So they have one baseline starting certification, which is the JNCIA-Junos certification. And that's where that certification starts like the CCNA pretty much, that nothing. So they teach you networking from the ground up, the basics of networking. And then, of course, because it's Juniper certification, you're expected to learn some of the basics of the Juniper architecture and some platform characteristics, and certainly Juniper's command line and how their command line works to do some of the basic things like routing and security of firewalls and things like that. So the JNCIA Junos is sort of like the starting point of their certifications. And then once you get that, you can move up to the higher level certs.
Great. Thanks, Keith. And Rohit, you've been working on two other portions of the learning paths for Juniper for INE, which are the JNCIS and the JNCIP. Is that correct, Rohit?
Yes, that is correct. If you look at the Juniper certifications, there are different tracks available. There's the enterprise, there's the service provider, or security. At this point of time, I was working on the specialist and the professional for the enterprise track. So what we've actually done is created the whole curriculum as per the blueprint of Juniper, and we've made videos and quiz questions and labs for both those certifications. They're pretty similar to each other, but the basic difference being there's more lab oriented in the professional versus the specialist.
Great. And Peter, you've been working on the security portion of the Juniper certification, right? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Correct. Yeah, so the JNCIA SEC is an entry-level certification for the Juniper security path. It is, for those of you guys who are familiar with Cisco certifications, it is actually pretty similar to the old style Cisco's CCNA security. And I say old style because this certification no longer exists. It was replaced, actually included in that standard CCNA certification. But as any other type of entry-level certification, It is, as actually Keith mentioned, it's a pretty good starting point for anyone who wants to start their journey with Juniper, because of the content, the way that it is structured, because of the different mix of topics, and also the level that they are presented. It's a really good starting point for someone who has no previous experience with Juniper and want to learn their technologies and solutions for security.
Great, great. Thanks, Peter. So, Keith, you were talking about the fact that for the entry level, the JNCIA, there's testing on some of the theory of networking, but also the practical implementation of the technologies. Can you tell us a little bit more about what specific technologies are covered in the scope of the exam of the JNCIA?
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I can do better than that. Let me share Juniper's actual website with us. For those who don't know this website exists, I'd like to show you their website. So you can see here, if you just Google Juniper JNCIA-Junos, you can easily find this. And just like Cisco has one for all their certifications, which gives a topics list, this gives a topics list as well. So if you just scroll down through here under exam objectives, you can see it's broken out into about 5 or 6 different sections. They start out with networking fundamentals, and you can see it covers, just like it says, the basics of networking. So you have to know the basics of Ethernet, IPv4, IPv6, what's a VLAN, what's a collision and broadcast domain, what's connection oriented versus connectionless. This is actually new. The previous version of the JNCIA Junos did not have this networking fundamentals part. So if anybody's familiar with this, the older version, I think they changed over a couple of years ago, maybe less than that, then this part would be new. But everything else has been around for quite a while. Then you have Junos, the operating system fundamentals. And so from this point on down, it's a blend of knowing sort of the architecture of their routers and switches, what do they have in common, as well as, how to use the command line from the very foundational, how do you get into the command line? What are the various options, command line versus GUI, and what's the differences? And then you just go through some of the basics here. And then once we get back into theory, we get into routing as a theory. And at this level, routing is really simplistic, basically just static routes and real simple OSPF. Now, in our course, I include a little bit of BGP as well, even though that's technically not on the exam, only because our lab tasks are a little bit easier if you know BGP. And if you're familiar with Juniper, you probably know that Juniper got its start in the ISP space, in the service provider space. So when Juniper first came out, their equipment wasn't really designed for the home user or the enterprise user. It was really designed for massive routing in service provider environments. So, and that's probably still largely the case, although you will find it in enterprise environments. Probably more Juniper equipment is found in service providers than anywhere else. So certainly if you are working on Juniper or you expect to work on Juniper, you're going to have to know BGP. So that's why I include a little bit in our learning path, even though it's technically not in here, just a little bit, just a bit. And then they finish up with routing policies and firewall filters, which if you're familiar with Cisco, this would be similar to access lists, but they call it firewall filters. So these are the things that they cover in here, and all of this stuff we cover in our learning path as well.
So, Keith, it looks like a lot of the technical topics are pretty similar along the lines as what you would see in CCNA, that we've covered in other variations of videos and labs and stuff like that. So as someone who's coming traditionally from the Cisco world, what would you say if I wanted to take the exam without ever touching the Juniper CLI? Like, do you think I can get away with passing this exam just by knowing networking itself?
Absolutely not. I wish I could say that, but definitely not. So I actually took the exam just last week, I think it was, or maybe the week before, because I want to be able to tell you guys not what's on the exam, but have a little bit of experience behind my belt. And I can tell you that while there are some just networking theory questions on it, there were a lot of questions that were specific just to Juniper. You definitely had to know some of the Juniper architecture, like, what's a routing engine versus a packet forwarding engine? What makes them different? What's the connection between the two of them? There are also a lot of questions on the command line. Now, while the JNCIA Junos doesn't have any simulation questions like the CCNA does, it does have a ton of multiple choice questions based on the CLI. So if you don't know the command line, you wouldn't be able to get those questions correct. So you definitely need to have some time and experience on the platform and know the Juniper specifics of how to get stuff done in order to pass their exam.
So Keith, we know that obviously we could buy physical hardware, go out on eBay and, order some Juniper routers and switches, but without, other than having physical gear, what are the options that the students can get some hands-on access to the Juniper Juno CLI to get experience on this?
Yeah, sure. I can talk a little bit about that, and then I actually want to hand that over to Rohit to give more detail about it. But let me share something again, just real quickly here. So what I'd like to share is what you should be seeing, hopefully, there we go, is our JNCIA Junos learning path that we have here at INE. So this is the top of the page. And then if you scroll down, you'll just see, here's our courses to cover the networking fundamentals section. And then we have courses for each of the other sections. And so if you go into a course, for example, if I go into the configuration fundamentals monitoring and maintenance course, you'll see there's a ton of videos in there. And then, so this is a symbol for a video. This is a symbol for a quiz to test your understanding on that video. And then we have these lab tasks. So if you have the appropriate, INEAP subscription level, you have access to these lab tasks where you can actually get some hands-on experience with the Junos command line doing some of these things. And I'd like to turn this over to Rohit a little bit better because he's got a great plan for demonstrating how these labs actually work.
Yeah, so like Keith was saying, along with the videos and the quizzes, all of the learning paths now include labs for our new web-based engine. And Rohit's going to show us here is specifically how that works, and then what are some of the technologies that you can get access to from a hands-on point of view using that system. Rohit?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty excited actually to show you this demonstration because we've gone way beyond what we used to have back in the day, where we had rack rentals. You had to book a slot and then load the configs and then do task. But what INE actually has done is gone way beyond with making the lab available to you whenever you want at any point of time, basically dynamically building a topology for you to practice. So what actually INE has done is, if you look at our course structure, let me in fact show you that. If you look at a course structure, maybe you go to learning paths, and if you are from the networking domain, go to networking. Here's where you would see all the certifications. So if you click on, let's say, the Juniper JNCIS Enterprise and the JNCIP Enterprise course, you would see there are multiple courses inside that certification. And let's say if you click on any one of the course, maybe deploying OSPF with Juniper routers, you would reach this page here, which basically shows you all the list of videos which is available inside that course. Now, what INE has done in the last few months is we've basically made a course which is associated to a certification. And within the certification, within the course itself, we have three parts. We have the videos, which basically tells you about what this technology is all about, how it works, and I am actually demonstrating on live products. So I don't really use slides as such, mainly for demonstrating. So if let's say if I click on any one of my course, any one of my video, in fact, you would see that I'm actually pulling down live devices and live routers. So if you scroll down here and let's say you move ahead, you would see that I'm actually working on live products, showing you the debugs or how it works, how to configure stuff. So knowing how to configure is basically learned through the videos. The next thing that you would see is the quiz questions. The quiz question just helps you understand, okay, have you watched the video? Have you understood the concepts? So you basically watch the video, you watch the quiz questions. And once you finish the quiz questions, you would move on to the next task, which is going to be to actually configure things. Let's in fact go back and um, let's go to the lab section. I believe there's some feedback. But anyway, so when you go to the lab section, when you click on Start Lab, what you would see is that we present you with a workbook, something like a workbook which has a diagram. You can right click on the diagram and open that in a new tab, so you can pull that to a new monitor. There's going to be a task here which actually tells you, okay, what you're supposed to do. So here it says all routers have been pre-configured with IP addressing. You need to configure routers 1 through 6 with OSPF area 0. Maybe create some loopbacks, advertise them in area 0. Maybe do some summarization depending on the task. So here we have a task. So think of this like an actual workbook, but the biggest difference here is that this task is associated with the video that you just watched. So imagine you learning something by watching the video, then you answering some quiz questions, and then you doing the lab on that video based on that video that you just watched. So, so here the advantage is that this lab is available to you whenever you want on demand. So the minute you click on, there would be a start lab button here. I've already started this because it takes about 2 or 3 minutes for it to populate. So what really happens behind the scene is INE dynamically builds the topology for you that matches this diagram. It loads the configs for you that matches this task, and you can directly go and configure stuff. So if you actually go back to the environment, when you click on Open Lab, it opens a new browser for you. You don't need any VPN. You only need a browser to connect to our labs. And then this topology matches exactly what is there in this diagram, what is there in this task. All you have to do is double click on the router to open the console. You would see the console here. Let's say if I open up router 3, you would see the console coming here. You would see router 3 coming here. Let's go back and close this. So all you can do is just log in. Obviously, the username password is given to you in the question itself. So the biggest advantage that I feel is that this lab is dynamically available to you 24 hours whenever you want. You don't really need to wait for a time slot to book a rack and then wait for that time, because sometimes you actually get pulled inside a meeting. I may have scheduled time for tomorrow to practice, but what if I am pulled inside a meeting? I want to practice right now. You can do that by starting the lab dynamically and clicking on that, and the lab is built for you. So that's the biggest advantage that we have now. And we've done this for all our tracks, whether it's Cisco or even Juniper.
Yeah, Rohit, that's definitely one of the big advantages, I would say personally, is that you don't need to plan out your study schedule as much as you did in the past with our previous systems. Because like you said, everything's going normal during the day, and then all of a sudden the network crashes and you get pulled into a meeting, and then your study schedule gets broken up. So it's definitely nice to have that on demand. So I want to switch gears a little bit here and go to some audience questions. There's a couple of questions that are along the similar theme here, which is Jorge says, if I'm already a CCNP level engineer, should I still start with JNCIA, or is there another cert that I should start with? And then there's another question. If I'm already an experienced engineer, what cert should I start with? Should I start with JNCIA? I'm currently preparing for Cisco CCNA. So where would I start with in the Juniper path? So I think the big answer to this question goes along with the hands-on labs, and this goes back to the question that I had asked Keith. Is, can you realistically go into this certification exam, take the test without knowing the Juniper CLI, without having hands-on experience? And the answer is definitely no. So in my opinion, I would say even if you're at, the CCNP or even the CCIE level, it would be good to start at the JNCIA Junos level, just to get used to how the command line works. Because for those of you that are already familiar with Cisco and then are also familiar with Juniper, there is a huge difference in terms of how the interfaces work uh, between the two of them. Okay, so let's see. We have some other questions here. So
And
let's
Brian,
talk. Go
if
ahead,
I
Keith.
could just add one other thing to that. One, and this is a pro or a con depending on how you look at it. But one thing that makes Cisco different than Juniper is, with Cisco certifications, let's say that you already had a lot of experience with networking. Cisco does not force you to take the CCNA. If you felt qualified, you could jump right into taking the CCNP or even taking the CCIE if you pass the CCNP Enterprise Core exam. Juniper is not like that. So if you actually look at Juniper's website, I'm not sharing this page right now, but for example, I'm looking at the JNCIP-ENT exam, which is like the next one up from the JNCIA-JUNOS, and it says right in there that the JNCIA Junos was a prerequisite. So pretty much have to take that exam to be able to go on to the upper level exams, which, like I said, pro or con, depending on how you view it. But you have to start there in order to move up to the higher ones.
I'd like to add something to that too. Just from experience, in fact, I've been doing Cisco since 20 years. And when I moved to Juniper, I actually took the JNCIS exam without learning. I mean, I did the JNCIA certification, but the JNCIS, I actually took that exam without actually reading much stuff. And I was just correlating Cisco to Juniper, and I barely passed. I think the passing was 64. I got 65 just because I knew Cisco. So I was like, okay, you know what? How would Cisco behave in this? I didn't know the commands at that time. So I would really not recommend jumping the gun. You should go through JNCIA for the architecture part. You may have 20 years of experience, but you should look at the architecture part. Maybe you don't need to go through IPv4 addressing or the basic VLANs. You may know that, but you can go through the architecture part for the JNCIA and then move on to JNCIS.
So Rohit, going along with that, what is the difference between the JNCIS and the JNCIP? They both kind of map to the CCNP or the professional level that Cisco has. Is that kind of correct there?
That is correct. So the Cisco has the CCNP versus what Juniper has done is they have one certification, which is the specialist JNCIS versus the professional, which is JNCIP. It's just one exam each. But the key difference, topic wise, they're pretty much the same. They have overlapping topics. The key difference between the JNCIS and the JNCIP is more hands on. So they ask you a lot of commands, basically, a lot of syntax for commands. So you really have to know how the commands actually look, how they work. They'll probably give you policies, and you have to go through the policies and see what's going to be the action. So you really have to know how to configure stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So specialist is more theoretical concept based. For example, there's a topic like BGP. It's more on, okay, how BGP attributes work, versus in professional, you'll see more of there's a BGP attribute pre-configured. They'll show you the configuration and you have to look at the configuration and then decide the answer.
Great. Thanks for that. So we have another audience question. Peter, this one's going to be for you related to security. The question is, I'm in cybersecurity. Will going for this certification be helpful for me? So Peter, can you tell us a little bit about what is the technical scope of the security portion of the JNCIA?
Yeah, so with Juniper, that for this certification is that they generally focus on their flagship next generation firewall system, which is called SRX. So SRX is an equivalent. You can think of that as an equivalent of Cisco's Firepower, and that makes a large portion of the test of the exam, with some other portions being related to more advanced security appliances and solutions, such as advanced threat protection and maybe centralized management systems and some others. Now, there is certainly scope overlap between the cybersecurity and network security in general. I don't believe that Juniper makes this distinct um, division between the cybersecurity and network security like what Cisco does now. So there is going to be some overlap between these two IT areas, and it is a good starting point to just to get familiar with the Juniper as one of the vendors and their platforms. Some of the theory is going to be obviously the same between these two areas. So it makes sense if you want to go for Juniper. It makes sense to take a look at the JNCIA SEC in the context of cybersecurity as well.
Great. Thanks for that, Peter. We have another question here. Do we need a networking background to start the certification exam? So I think, Keith, this one would be for you. In your opinion, when you look at the JNCIA Junos learning path and the CCNA learning path, like you said, there's a bunch of overlap between the two of them there. What other prerequisites or certifications would you say might be needed before you get into that?
Honestly, when it comes to the JNCIA-Junos certification, I don't think you need any prerequisites. I mean, it starts out from the absolute basics. So yeah, I mean, I guess the only prerequisite would be, if someone's worked, as a shoe salesman for the last 20 years and they've never touched a laptop or seen the internet, they should probably get a little bit of internet experience and computer experience first. But hey, if you're watching this show, you have the prerequisite experience to start working on your JNCIA-Juno. So you're good to go.
So you would say, in your opinion, like the CCNA, it's a good starting point. So if I was to pick one versus the other, they still cover the same type of fundamentals of networking, right?
Yeah, I would say that.
Great. There was another question about exam vouchers. And Keith, I think you had some information about this that can you tell us a little bit about the actual process of registering for and taking the exam and so forth, how that works?
Yes. So this is one of the benefits of taking the Juniper exams as opposed to the Cisco exams is that they're cheaper. At least the JNCIA is. I think Cisco CCNA is like $299 and the JNCIA is $200, so $100 cheaper. But they do have on their website. So they do, and somebody I think in the chat mentioned this, that they do have their own learning videos as well that you can go through. And if you watch each and every one, you have to watch them from beginning to end, and there's like 50 of them or something. There's a lot. If you go through all of them, then at the very end, they have like a practice exam you can take. And if you get 70% on that practice exam, they only give you 3 attempts. If you get 70% or higher, then they give you an exam voucher, which reduces the price from $200 down to $50 to take the JNCIA-Junos. And once I did that and passed the JNCIA-Junos, I noticed that they then unlocked a similar ability to get another voucher for the next level up. So I don't know if they do that for all of their exams, but they certainly do that for the JNCIA-Junos exam. And one thing I'd like to answer, because there was sort of a question about this as well, which is, somebody might be wondering, well, hey, if Juniper offers a bunch of free videos that I can watch and they have their own practice exam at the end, why would I subscribe to your service? And there's 3 main things I can think of. So number one, certainly we've been talking about the hands-on lab tasks, and that's something Juniper doesn't have. Now, Juniper does have something called a VLab environment, and if you've seen some of our other Juniper courses we've created before INE came up with our lab tasks in a platform, we did a lot of our courses using Juniper's VLab environment, using that as a demonstration, saying, hey, here's what I'm going to do, and then if you log in yourself, you can follow along with me. But there's a couple problems with their environment versus ours. Number one, Juniper's VLab environment is static, fixed. You can't move around links. You can't change the topology. It is what it is. And so if you're looking for topology and you say, you know what, to practice this, I really need 5 routers, but maybe they don't have a topology that's got 5 routers. They've only got one with 3 routers. You're kind of stuck in that regard. Whereas in our lab tasks, first of all, our lab tasks are finely tuned for a particular video. So if you're watching a video on OSPF neighbor adjacencies or BGP peering or something, the lab task will be tuned for what you just learned in that video. And then secondly, our lab tasks are based in a GNS3 environment, and you can modify the topology if you want to. So if you want to go above and beyond what the lab task is asking you to do and practice something more advanced or try breaking something and see what happens, by all means, you can do that. But the VLabs in Juniper's website, you can't. You're stuck with what they have. So that's one big benefit of going through our learning path. The second thing is, one thing that we as INI instructors are well known for, whether it be myself, Brian, you, Peter, Rohit, is that we go above and beyond just teaching you the technology of here's how this works. If you configure this, this is going to happen. We're very good at explaining why would you want to do this? What benefit do you get from using this feature or protocol over this other feature or protocol? Where would you use this in real life? In what situations might this feature or protocol maybe not be appropriate, or maybe actually cause some problems that you weren't anticipating? So you get a lot of that practical experience through our learning path videos that you're not going to get from theirs. And then lastly, when you're going through their videos in their learning path, most of the videos end with quizzes, but their quiz questions a lot of times are just like one or two questions. And our questions are much more in depth. And our quiz questions, a lot of times we have more quiz questions than they do. So I think all of that taken together makes going through our learning path a superior product than what they have. But, like I said, the one benefit of going through theirs is that you get that exam voucher at the end, which reduces the cost of the exam. And that's a nice thing to have.
Great. Thanks for that, Keith. Yeah, I definitely see the advantage of having the video and then the lab task right there, so you can keep your focus on whatever you learned in theory. Watch our demonstration of OSPF or BGP or Ethernet switching, and then be able to apply that right as a hands-on lab task while you're in that mindset of that particular technology. Mm-hmm. We have another question here from the audience. What was the motivating factor behind producing so many new Juniper learning paths? So I wanted to field this or ask this to everybody here. And I think in my opinion, this goes along with the diversification of equipment and solutions that you would see out there in a practical network today. That as a true network engineer, you don't want to necessarily pigeonhole yourself into only learning one particular vendor solution of how to solve a problem. Where when you get into a real world deployment, you might find that not all those boxes out there are running Cisco iOS. So Rohit, what would you say? I know you've been working with Cisco for a very, very long time, and the Juniper focus, and at least for us, is relatively new. But what would you say to someone that is, either just getting into the industry or kind of in the middle of their career? Would you recommend learning the Juniper solution and the Cisco solution?
I mean, learning Juniper from the start is much easier than learning it once you know Cisco, because you always start comparing with Cisco. But yes, like you said, that nowadays companies don't really have one vendor. You'll never find you just having Cisco products. You'll probably have Cisco routers, Juniper routers. You'll have maybe ASA firewalls. You'll have Palo Alto. You'll have Checkpoint. You'll have it's basically multi-vendor. That's the main reason why, as an engineer, I would want to know different technologies, different vendors, how it actually works. See, BGP is BGP. 90% of it is still going to be the same. The only difference is going to be how BGP works on Juniper versus how BGP works on Cisco. So you knowing the technology and then knowing the vendors gives you basically an edge. In fact, that's one of the reasons why we also did some courses on cross-platform. So in fact, I have this on my screen here. I did a course pretty recently. I'm not sure if you can see my screen, but I did a course on deploying BGP on Cisco and Juniper routers. The main reason I did this course was because, again, from an enterprise network or even a service provider environment, you'll have different platforms from different vendors. And that's why I wanted to do this course where we have BGP on Cisco and Juniper coming in together. Because again, from a theoretical perspective, if you see, BGP is BGP, right? But if you look at Cisco, Cisco has iBGP AD value of 220 for eBGP versus Juniper has 170 for both. So that's a few differences between Cisco and Juniper. That really helps you from the certification perspective, but knowing how to configure it on different platforms really helps.
Great, great. Keith, what would you say about the multi-platform, uh, learning to know both the Cisco side and the Juniper side?
Yeah, well, as both you and Rohit have said, I'm assuming that the vast majority of people who subscribe to INE and watch our videos are either doing it because they want to become network engineers, moving from some other type of role, or they want to advance their career, or maybe stay as a network engineer but move to a different company or something. And if you look at any job posting for a network engineer, 99% of the time, those postings are requesting people to know all sorts of different things. Very rarely will you see a posting that says, we only expect you to know Cisco, and that's it. So certainly you're only increasing your potential value as an employee if on your resume you can say, hey, I know Cisco and Juniper. Those are two different platforms. So right there, you show that you have the ability to learn and that you know different things. Another sort of side benefit to this is, like Rohit was talking about, if I only know Cisco, and like he was talking about, let's say I only know BGP in Cisco world, and then I go work for a shop that has Cisco and Juniper, or maybe Cisco and something else, I might be taken by surprise and things might not be acting the way I expected to, because different vendors have different defaults and values for different things. So I might be expecting, for example, BGP to act a certain way because in my Cisco only labs, that's the way it's always acted. And all of a sudden I get into an environment where, oh, wait a second, the best path is not this direction over here, it's choosing this direction over here. And why is that? Well, if you didn't know that, Juniper has different route preference values than Cisco's administrative distance values, you would have no way of predicting or troubleshooting why your paths are different than what you expected. So certainly knowing those differences are useful. And then a third thing that I thought of is, a lot of times when you're preparing for a certification, what you learn is limited to the scope of that certification, right? I mean, Cisco has so many features and so many things, no one person can learn it all. And yet, when I was studying for the Juniper stuff, and I found out that, oh, this Juniper device, you can do this on it. And I thought, wow, that's something completely different and unique that I've never learned about Cisco. It made me think, can Cisco do something like that? And it made me go off and study something to see if Cisco had a feature or command that was similar to what I was learning on Juniper. And so that made me actually a better Cisco engineer, because now I was researching something that I never would have researched if I was stuck within the confines of researching for a certification. So there's a lot of potential benefits of learning more than one platform.
Yeah, Keith, I think that's definitely a great point. To be a more well-rounded engineer, that both sides can definitely help you get where you want to be, whether it's for your career goals, or for your certification goals. It's definitely advantageous to be able to look at it from both sides of the coin. Mm-hmm. So, Peter, I wanted to ask you about, in terms of security. I know that security is one of those fields that there's so many different vendors out there, and there's not really necessarily one name like Cisco or Juniper or Palo Alto, whatever, out there that really has a product for every possible security solution out there. So in my opinion, I would say it's definitely advantageous to know how the different security vendors work. But Peter, from your perspective, how would you compare like the Cisco firewall solution to the Juniper firewall solution?
Yeah, Brian. So you're right. Actually, some vendors pretend to have a single super versatile solution that they claim is gonna cover all your needs, but this is this is generally not the case. So this area of networking changes so rapidly that a single vendor is not always able to come up with to cover all possible cases or possible threat vectors. And one of the main principles that people follow in the area of network security is known as defense in depth, which means that you generally want to rely on more than one security element for a given threat vector. So it makes sense to use multiple vendor appliances to avoid possible issues with software bugs or other less predictable problems. Now, in terms of the Cisco and Juniper firewall solutions, I would say that these are both the next generation firewall systems. So Cisco's firepower and Juniper's SRX, they have a lot in common. They go far behind stateful filtering, offering stateful filtering capabilities, and they offer much more than that. And actually, I noticed that a lot of features, security features that Cisco offers, you can also find them in the Juniper's portfolio. So these are actually quite similar in terms of capabilities. Now, obviously, there are going to be some differences feature-wise. I'm not saying that every single feature you will find on Cisco's Firepower, you'll be able to see it on the SRX. But the main vendors like Palo Alto, like Checkpoint, like the Juniper's SRX and Cisco's Firepower, these appliances are all pretty solid and pretty much up to date with the today's threat landscape.
Great. Appreciate that, Peter. So if anybody else has any other questions, feel free to continue to type those in. But that's getting pretty close to us about wrapping up our discussion for today. So I want to thank Rohit and Keith and Peter for joining me today. And again, the new Juniper Learning Paths are available right now on my.ini.com. You go to networking and then learning paths, and you can see the JNCIA Junos, which is authored by Keith, the JNCIE, JNCIA Security, which is authored by Peter, and then the Specialist and the Professional, the JNCIS, and the JNCIP that is authored by Rohit. So for any technical questions that you have on those courses, we're always happy to answer those. You can get in touch with us through email or through social media, through LinkedIn, through Twitter, etc. And of course, this video will be posted on our platform as well as a recorded video if you want to go back through it to see any of the topics that we were talking about. But otherwise, I appreciate everyone coming out today for our live discussion on our new Juniper Learning Paths. And I hope to see everybody back here soon for future INE Lives.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.